Well, once again, markets around the world are plummeting due to fears over global debt. The United States can't seem to find a way to cut its borrowings, and economic instability continues to dog Europe. One person who's observed the ongoing global meltdown very closely is Michael Lewis, one of the world's most successful non-fiction authors. Two of his books, The Blind Side and Moneyball, have been turned into blockbuster films. He's spent the past few years travelling to countries hardest hit by the financial crisis to find out what caused it and how different people have reacted. His new book, Boomerang, The Meltdown Tour, is a collection of essays he's written for Vanity Fair magazine about the GFC, and he joined me earlier from California. Michael Lewis, in Boomerang, you've taken a tour through 5 of the countries hardest hit by the global financial crisis. Are you able to say, looking at those 5 countries, if there are any common factors that have caused this crisis at its core?
The cause of the crisis is the same everywhere. The cause is a kind of incontinence in the global banking system that enabled all sorts of people and companies and banks and countries to borrow money that they shouldn't have been allowed to borrow, at least on the terms at which they borrowed the money. The thing that's so interesting to me is that though the cause is basically the same everywhere, the consequences are different everywhere because people responded to this temptation differently depending on where they were.
Well, let's explore the example of Greece, since that's the country that people will have been hearing the most about in the news. How did this happen in Greece without anybody saying, well, hang on a minute, what's going on here? Is this actually okay?
Not only did nobody in Greece say very much about it as it was happening, but the Greeks actually disguised their own books. I mean, the Greek government, with the help of Goldman Sachs, cooked its books to meet the requirements to enter the euro back in 2001. And I think that the answer to your question is that it was just in no one's interest to blow any kind of whistle and say this is unsustainable. There were a handful of people who were protesting the outrages of the Greek government. There was a former finance minister named Stefanos Manos who did things like calculate that with the inefficiency with which the Greek National Railroad was run, it would actually pay Greece just to put all the passengers in taxi cabs and close down the National Railroad. But there were, I think the problem in Greece is that everybody is kind of in on it. That there were too many, everybody one way or another benefited from this handout operation that the state became.
How about the Germans? Why are they the ones who are going to be lumped with the bill for what's going on in Europe?
The German example is riveting because it's not as if the Germans were spared this temptation. The Germans could have done what we in America did, what all these different European countries did. They could have used the temptation of very cheap money to create real estate bubbles, to send their banks out on conquests of the world, or whatever it was they might have wanted to do. But the German people behaved very, very, very responsibly. I mean, to this day, it is a taboo in Germany to borrow money for consumption, to borrow money you can't repay. There are in place still these social strictures that constrain personal behavior. And as a result, Germany is on relatively very, very sound footing. I mean, having behaved responsibly, having increased their productivity, they're the deep pockets in Europe. They don't have debts they can't afford to repay. And so you've got this very strange situation in Europe where you've got one population, one national population, the German people, who feel that we behave well, all these other people behave badly. Why should we now be on the hook for their losses? So it's just a kind of digging their heels in feeling. We're not going there. We're not going to, for example, enable the European Central Bank to bail out these other countries because we were promised that we wouldn't have to do it. And I think they feel like they control their destiny. I mean, I think that there is a feeling that they're not going to have to do it if they don't want to do it. So the question is then, what becomes of the euro?
Well, and what do you think becomes of the euro?
I think it fractures. I don't know how many countries leave it, but I don't believe, for example, 5 years from now, the Greek currency is going to be the euro. I think it's going to be something else. I think that the pressures in the markets now, one of two things has to happen. Either the German people reverse themselves, and that seems very unlikely because the German people seem to becoming more, not less hostile to the idea of bailouts, and they enable the European Central Bank to essentially buy up all the Italian and Spanish and Greek government bonds they need to finance these countries. Or the financial markets force the issue and these countries on the periphery aren't able to fund themselves. And the latter looks more likely to me. It looks to me like what you're going to get is the Greek people, after long periods of austerity, getting frustrated with the euro and probably voluntarily exiting.
How does what's going on in the US economy compare to Europe?
It's funny. The U.S. financial system is in a way the tallest midget because we are still in a mess. We still have these banks that are too big to fail that are now effectively government guaranteed, and they're still doing kind of speculative things. It's sort of we keep the profits from this speculative activity. If it all goes wrong, taxpayers get the losses, and there's a lot of outrage about that. And I think that mere fact is at the bottom of the Occupy Wall Street movement. But our financial system is not nearly as precarious. But right now, we don't look like the problem. Right now, we still look, improbable as it is, like a safe haven.
You mentioned the Occupy Wall Street movement. What have you made of that? And do you see it as anything more than a niche protest?
I think it's a really big deal. The tents in the parks in various cities may or may not be a big deal. I mean, I think that it's not so much that is there is a palpable anger about what has happened here. There's this grotesque injustice that has been committed. The elites of the society orchestrated a financial debacle that they were then rescued from. The consequences of that debacle are felt by less privileged people. And everybody understands there are kind of two sets of rules. There's one set of rules if you happen to work in this paper-shuffling financial system, and another set of rules if you happen to be out in the real world, in the productive world. It's sort of like socialism for capitalists and capitalism for everybody else. And that outrages people. America will put up with great inequalities of wealth, but the idea that some people, no matter how badly they perform, are not allowed to fail is outrageous to Americans. And that anger is fueling not just the Occupy Wall Street movement, but the Tea Party movement. So I think so what you've got here is growing, swelling anger that will express itself politically one way or another.
Michael Lewis, pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.